Okay, people is coming, so we are ready. So I think that Bindu is quite known inside the community. Probably the newbies don't know nothing about Bindu, but Bindu comes from the USA. Zia company is chief architect, one of the most important partners in the US, and we'll talk about how to support and how to have the best support with Alfresco. Thank you.
Thank you. So at Zia, we spent the last year, we get a certain commission for selling Alfresco, right? And we were told, hey, if you do first level support, we'll give you more commission. And we thought, oh well, we already do support for our customers. We already do that, so let's take the money and that'll be awesome. And of course, it was more complicated than that. It's been a really interesting journey. We actually have our customers put their tickets into the Alfresco support portal, and then we kind of do the triage and the initial responses. We do a lot of level 2 and level 3 as well, because there's some challenges with handoffs. So this is just kind of a non-exhaustive, incomplete, but a kind of good introduction to some of the lessons learned. A lot of basic stuff, some good tips and tricks. There's basically 3 themes. We're going to look at the main meat of the presentation is some tips and tricks and ideas around how to investigate issues, which folks will get 1 or 2 good pieces of information out of. And then there's a couple sections, one on just how to have an effective relationship with Alfresco support. So that's for folks running enterprise. And then Richard gave me some advice on, I don't do much with JIRA because I mostly go through Alfresco support and they put JIRAs in for us. Richard gave me some advice on how to best create an effective JIRA ticket. So we'll go over that as well for folks in the community that maybe aren't working directly with support. So first things first, use supported versions. You've probably heard this a few times at the conference already. Awesome. Let's try not doing that. So, there's supported stacks, and sometimes the supported stack can change even with like not with a hotfix, but with a, if you get a bug fix release, you may need to tweak the version of your database or your JDBC driver or your OS. The official policy from Alfresco is if they have a specific version that's been tested, if you have a sort of minor version increment on that in your environment, they're going to continue to support you unless they find some indication that difference is likely to be the problem, and then they'll still ask you to go back and reproduce it on a specifically supported stack. So this is really key. We do actually run into a lot of problems with people using significantly major version differences, especially with databases, a little bit with OSs. Do this. Don't have it be a variable. The other thing is the day 0 guide. Alfresco used to always just be set up out of the box for developer, like persona, right? So it wasn't sort of set up to scale in the default out-of-the-box configuration. Some of those settings have changed now, so instead of 40 connections in Tomcat, you have 200. But there's a bunch of information. There's a day 0 guide that is not being updated anymore. All that information has been moved into docs. I still find it's a nice place to go to kind of get a sense of what's important and worth tuning, like file handles and things like that for different OSs. So some simple things. When did the problem start? So trying to isolate, if you're experiencing an issue in your environment, try and isolate the period of time when, even if you say, well, it worked 2 weeks ago, and now it's not working today, so it must have broken in the last 2 weeks. That's way better than Well, we don't really know when it broke, right? Because it really can help you understand what changed, right? So when you're trying to figure out what changed, typically you have a system that's working and then something breaks. Of course, if you just install it and you have problems, this is less useful advice, but you know, understanding what changed, you know, they reconfigured something in your network, so new IP addresses have been assigned somewhere, or disks were changed, or you know, all those kinds of things. If you know when the problem started, it's much easier to focus on finding out what changed. So for the case where maybe you're just doing an initial install and things are not working, or you're kind of getting your environment set up and things are not working, remove as many variables as possible. I know this is simple advice, but sometimes it's overlooked even though it's simple, and it really, these three things are like some of the best tools you can use. So the idea with removing as many variables as possible is, you know, let's say you have an environment with a load balancer. You know, you might try just installing a standalone instance and see if you can reproduce your problem. You might try bypassing your load balancer, you know, set an SSH tunnel up to your server and just go directly bypass the load balancer. So you're sort of removing the network from the problem. You might try disabling your customizations or removing them, see if that helps. And what's really key, especially if you're going to be doing a JIRA or working with support, is finding steps to reproduce, right? So do this, do this, do this, and the problem happens. Now, if you have an intermittent issue, it may be difficult to do that. So the one thing about that is you may have steps to reproduce, but it's an intermittent issue. If that's the case, you want to characterize how often it happens. So you say it's about once every 10 times, or it happens every so for example, we had an issue where we could access the system and then we couldn't access the system, and we could access it and then we couldn't access it. And we were doing timings and we were noticing the system was accessible for exactly 60 seconds and then it would go away for exactly 120 seconds and it would come back for 60. And just knowing that range allowed us to go to the network team, and they figured out exactly what network router was flapping and why, because they had that timing detail. So being able to characterize that is really helpful. So some common issues, we see these things a lot. People have way too many direct children in a folder. This is kind of a little bit beating a dead horse. A few people have talked about it at the conference already. The guidance here is you want to shoot for having ideally less than about 1,000 nodes, direct children in a folder. I've never seen any issues with that. If you have 2,000 direct children, we have seen in certain extreme situations with complex ACLs or behaviors that are doing a lot of work, we have started to see issues around 2,000 nodes. Around 10,000 nodes, you are likely to experience problems at some point, right? We have had customers with literally 17 million direct children in one folder. And we were able to help them fix that, but it was extremely painful. It took a long time to kind of do little batches at a time because there's a lot of cascading updates that happen. So, you know, don't get into that situation. And if you see yourself in a situation where you have, say, 2,000 direct children, consider re-architecting your folder plan a little bit so that's not happening. Low on resources. So this could be memory. That's probably the most common situation. People have low memory environments. But other things like being low on disk, right? If you don't have enough swap space, network connection to the database is really key, right? So you want to have a very low ping time, less than 2 milliseconds to your database. You also want to make sure there's no jitter, which means you can use a tool like MTR. Basically, it's like ping, but it tells you, okay, well, my pings are going along, and they're 1 millisecond, and then all of a sudden there's 100 millisecond ping time, and then I'm going back to 1 millisecond, right? So if you're having little spikes of bad performance, that can create really bad problems, even though 99% of the time you're less than that 2 millisecond threshold. And then also your database. Definitely make sure that you have good disk on the database. The network connection to the database is good, that it has enough memory. Lots of problems there. Definitely, if you use the Alfresco installer, it's going to put Alfresco installer into the same JVM. Don't go to production like that. That's not a good idea. The memory profiles for Alfresco and Solar are really different, and they basically beat each other up in the JVM. So the garbage collector can't really tune very well for one or the other. So if you just run 2 Tomcats, they can be on the same server as long as you have enough resources. And you can find the right split. It depends on your environment, but just doing that can be a huge win. I do recommend running probably concurrent mark sweep for Solar. Alfresco recommends kind of leaving the default JVM settings and then tuning if you have to. I agree with that, but I would say for Solar, start with concurrent mark sweep, which isn't the default. You can use G1 as well, but I would start with concurrent mark sweep. Okay.
Sorry, a question. You have the extra license costs then if you separate Solar from Alfresco?
If they're on the same server, so the question was, is there an extra license cost, or there is an extra license cost if you separate Solar and Alfresco? If they're running on the same server, it's totally fine. There's no extra license cost. So use appropriate storage. This is like, Solar needs fast disk, right? The index needs to be on SSDs, locally attached. That can be challenging if you're in a virtual environment, but kind of work with your IT environment and just make sure you have as fast disk as you possibly can have. If it can't be fast, then you're accepting a slower system and you're just agreeing to that. And that's okay, but know what you're agreeing to. Content store doesn't really have to be that fast. Faster is better, but it doesn't matter that much. The content cache also doesn't really have to be that fast, but faster is better. So think about that. This is something we've actually run into a lot recently. So people run Alfresco on VMware, for example, and they allocate 32 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM to the VM, but they don't pin the memory. And there are serious issues with the JVM running in an environment like that where it thinks it has a certain amount of memory, but that memory can be constrained. I have a link in the document if you download it to a white paper from VMware about this. You need to pin the memory. You need to say if you're giving 32 megs, that 32 megs is available and you're not going to go down to 24 at some point because somebody else stole your memory on your host. This is extremely difficult to debug, so be aware of it. For enterprise customers, the default timeouts for the heartbeat for cluster and the timeout for clustering are okay for kind of small environments, but they probably the default should probably be increased. We're seeing a lot of cases where you have one cluster timeout fire because of something in your network or your database. When that happens, you have, let's say you have 20 transactions that are running in retrying transactions. A lot of times, all 20 of those will retry all at the same time when the cluster collapses. When they retry, they cause load pressure on your database, which causes everything to slow down, which causes your cluster to time out. And so you get in a situation where everything just grinds to a halt. Eventually, you will probably run out of memory. So if you're seeing behavior like that, if your database is getting thrashed, one thing to look at, a first good thing to look at is those timeouts, the heartbeat timeout and the cluster timeout. I have the actual settings in my notes in the deck, so you can pull that down. There's also some JVM settings that you can put in to expose JMX data for Hazelcast. And I also have those in here, so that can be helpful for debugging those sorts of issues.
And maybe one thing, garbage collection also affects the timeouts extremely. The garbage collection, if it takes too long, timeouts will fire and the cluster will separate.
Right, so Axel's comment was garbage collection can really affect this, and that's absolutely right. So if your JVM is in a situation where your GC takes 10 seconds to do a major GC at some point in the middle of the day, that could cause your cluster to disconnect. So I'm going to talk about some tools. Again, this is not exhaustive. It's just stuff that we've found to be really helpful. So there's a couple support tools add-ons. There's the older one that probably everybody knows about. This is enterprise only. It's actually integrated into Alfresco 5.2. And then there's the Order of the Bee version of this, which works with community and enterprise and has some enhancements with things like things that can help you do cluster tuning, better ability to do things with your log levels and stuff like that. So one of those tools, we recommend the Order of the Bee version. It can be really helpful. Log files, duh, right? So the key thing here is understanding log levels, right? So understanding what it means to set something to debug or warn or error, finding the right loggers to set. Through support, they actually can be really helpful about giving you a set of loggers if you're trying to debug Kerberos. There's, here's 5 loggers that you might want to set to these values, and that can really add a lot to your kind of debugging efforts. So that's worth understanding. Having an editor like Vim, plenty of tools do this that let you use regexes to kind of trace through these files. Using the thread IDs that show up in the logs to kind of, because you have lots of threads happening at the same time, so you can kind of filter out just one thread at a time. Usually that's a good thing. So if you're seeing something happen, just look at that one thread. On occasion, another thread is causing you problems, so you can't always do that, but that's really helpful. There is a tool called Log Sniffer, and I think it's a Java GUI app. And I have the log format, again, in the deck if you look in the notes. So if you use Log Sniffer and you use this log format, it'll help sort of automatically parse your log files. It's a pretty cool tool. I still use Vim, but some people like that. JMX dumps. Everybody hates JMX dumps. You can actually use JMX dumps from community, and there's some good information still in there about the version of Alfresco that you're using, JVM version, JVM arguments, things like that. This is particularly useful if you're trying to debug a system that you don't have access to, because it captures a lot of your configuration and things like that all in one place. So, consider that. And I have there's a URL you can hit even from community that'll just download a JMX dump, so that's not exposed anywhere. Maybe we should add that to support tools.
Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so especially if you don't have physical access to the machines, that's great. Node browser, again, duh, right? But in node browser, not only can you search for stuff and find a node, but realize that you can then follow the parent-child hierarchies, relationships. You can look at aspects, you can look at ACLs, things like that. Those can be very helpful. You can look at never remember what that right column is that says yes, 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 no, but it basically tells you if you have properties on your nodes that aren't covered by your model. JavaScript console can be really useful for creating a certain kind of load in order to try and reproduce a problem, or in order to set up a specific situation that then triggers the error that you're trying to reproduce. And if you can hand that off to support or on a JIRA ticket, that can be really helpful. If you're having a problem with an API Explorer can be really helpful to kind of go see a canonical instance of some API. and run that, so you're not using your code, you're using something that's pretty well tested. Similarly, CMIS Workbench, if you're doing CMIS stuff and you're having problems, if you can reproduce something with CMIS Workbench, that kind of takes your code out of the equation, right? So CMIS Workbench also has a Groovy console, so you can basically use Java, or Groovy is a superset of Java, so you can use Java or Groovy to kind of run some CMIS code, and that's a really nice way to kind of package up for support or a JIRA. Hey, run these 5 CMIS commands and something bad will happen, and support or people handling JIRAs aren't going to wonder about, well, did you do something stupid, because they see everything there. JConsole, JVisualVM, this is a little bit more for enterprise, but also can be useful for community. These tools give you the ability, especially there's a Visual GC plugin for JVisualVM that gives you a lot of detail about memory usage and garbage collection. They can be really helpful. They give you information about CPU usage. For enterprise, they expose all of the MBeans, so basically most of the stuff in your Alfresco global.properties is available to you there. You can set some of those values. Be careful doing that, because whatever you set there will override whatever's in your Alfresco global.properties. Another reason to use JMX, it shows you those things that have been overridden. So JStack-L. So a lot of times things are kind of going weird. You can take some JStacks before the error happens, and then while it's happening. -L basically can add some information about locks, so it can kind of help you debug issues. We use this a lot, just to figure out kind of what all is happening in Alfresco at a point in time. There's some tools like Spotify has an online stack dump analyzer. You just paste in the stack dump, and it will kind of summarize, hey, there's 15 instances of this stack trace, there's 10 instances of this stack trace. It's really helpful. There's also some tools, and I outlined this again in the comments, there's some tools that'll allow you to take periodic snapshots, JStacks, every 30 seconds, let's say, put them into the tool, and then it'll do some analysis across them to show you long-running threads and things like that. Okay, so I'm running a little longer than I thought, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. So for dealing with Alfresco support and trying to get the best out of that experience, it's worth understanding severity levels. Severity 1 is production system down. But this is actually also, if you're in the final stages of testing and you're having problems in your kind of go live environments, that would also be considered production system down. Severity 2 is major impact. So for example, if you have really time-sensitive questions, if you have really serious performance issues, those we would consider major impact, severity 2. Minor impact covers situations where your environments are moderately impacted, and then 4 is minor impact, or you just have a question. This is an ideal template for providing an issue. Description should be as concise as possible, but not more concise, right? So you want to have as complete a description of the situation as you can, but don't put extra stuff in there. Like if you have a really long log and you want to put that in there, don't put it in the description. Attach that. Maybe cut out 1 or 2 little pieces in the description. That's very helpful. Steps to reproduce, obviously, expected behavior, observed behavior. Any work that you've done so far, what do you think it is? Like, that's really valuable in support to know, like because you know way more about the environment and stuff, so put that in there. And then 2 optional things, specifically if you're trying to make a case for something that maybe looks like a level 2 and it has a really high business impact and you want to put it in as a level 1, put the business impact in there. Alfresco is really responsive to that. If you're saying we're losing $1 million a day, you're going to get way better response than if if it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. And then the desired outcome, right? Obviously, a lot of times that's obvious. Sometimes it's worth stating anyway. This is what I'd like to get out of this ticket. That can particularly be useful if you find a bug and you know what the problem is, and you report that and you expect it to just sort of turn into a JIRA, and instead they try and debug it with you, and you've already told them what the problem is and what the fix is. When you create a ticket, most of the time a JMX dump is helpful. People usually don't set up their environments. Keep those up to date. JMX has all of that details. It has overrides from, if you've used the admin pages to set stuff up. That's excellent. Bounded logs, right? So if an issue happened, don't send me 3 days worth of logs or months worth of logs. Send me, 10 minutes before, through the error happening, 10 minutes after. If the issue is intermittent, show me a log of the issue not happening and an issue of the problem happening. Specialized configuration files. So there's stuff that isn't in JMX, like solar core.properties or share config custom. So if you're having share issues or you're having solar issues, consider attaching those. If you have a severity 1 issue, write up the ticket using the template we just discussed and call support. That will make sure that the manager on duty is aware of your issue as soon as possible and can help you out. This is the service level targets that are published on the docs site right now. It's useful being aware of this. So for example, Alfresco has an initial response time that they're shooting for, so this is not, yep?
I was going to say, and any time you get tired of email back and forth, request a phone call. They will call you. You don't have to just keep doing the email thing.
Anytime you get tired of emailing back and forth, request a phone call. Absolutely. Did not have that in here. It's good advice. So for the initial response, let's say, for a premier customer with a SEV2 ticket, they can expect to get a response within 2 hours. And then for all subsequent communication, that, enterprise customer with a SEV3 ticket is going to get an update every 2 days. Right, so useful to know that, so you kind of have expectations set. A few tips: be kind and responsive. It doesn't hurt to be a jerk. If you're a jerk, you're going to get worse response, not because people want to give you worse response, it's just they kind of don't care. They want to care, but they kind of don't care, right? So just be nice and be responsive. If you're taking a really long time to respond to tickets, it's leaving people's minds and they're having to go and read back through the history and kind of re-onboard your information. That's really helpful. Put tickets on hold if you're busy. So if you're not able to be responsive, just say, hey, I'm out for a week, I'm going on holiday, I'm overloaded with other stuff, can you put the ticket on hold? Alfresco can put a ticket on hold. They say 2 weeks, it's actually a month, but they can put a ticket on hold for up to 2 weeks, generally. And then they'll open it back up and ping you and see how things are going. If you are not responsive for like 5 days in a row, they will close your ticket. And that's just because, it's a waste of time. You're wasting their time, and that's not cool. If you just comment on the ticket within 30 days, it'll reopen and you can keep going. So nobody, there's no hard feelings, it's just kind of the process, right? So, yeah, response times and reopening tickets, we talked about that. If it's been more than 30 days since your ticket was closed, open a new ticket and reference the ticket number. For JIRA tickets, alpha issues are a conversation. This has come up already in the conference. If your ticket is closed and you really care about it, reopen it. That means something. Community-only issues. So, ALF is for community issues. Community-only issues are, if they were not exhibited in enterprise, they're less likely to be worked on. Use the community for support. ALF tickets are not for support, right? So you have to really have an issue. You have to be able to explain that. Use our issue template that I outlined in here. And I realize I'm running out of time.
No,
So I have a couple minutes.
You have a couple of minutes more?
Yeah.
Consider also the question.
Yeah.
No more.
Okay. So yeah, use the community for support and kind of get to a point where you can reproduce the issue. Make sure you've gone and made sure there aren't issues already for what you're reporting. Same thing, investigate. If you don't like how something works in Alfresco, that's not a bug. That's just you not liking something. You're not likely to get much movement on that. That's just you not liking something. Sorry. See the support templates. So for triage, we heard weekly. I think the expectation is fortnightly, and that's partly to do with the movement of who's on those reviews. They're trying to make fast decisions. If you include a patch, the whole process they have, if you have a patch, you're getting further up the queue. So put in patches if you have them, you'll get better response. Provide an effects version. If you don't do that, your ticket will likely get closed sooner than if you do. Issues do get closed if they're over a year old with no effects version. If the effects version that you have on there only contain unsupported versions of Enterprise Edition, right? So they've gone out of support basically. If the effects version only contains releases of Community Edition that are older than 2 releases back, they're just going to get closed. Again, if they get closed and you really care about them, reopen them. That means something.
If you really care about them and can reproduce them on current community, reopen them.
There you go.
Mhm.